Today we have Kelly Thomas with us. Kelly is an operations and pricing leader for power generation, oil and gas at G Digital, but she's also a DEI very strong supporter, and she loves Candor as well. We're going to be talking about all of that today. She's a women's network co-chair, and more importantly, she's a mom, she's a mentor, and she's a wannabe runner. One of the things that I've learned is sharing what you want to achieve with the world is a great way of getting some accountability. So I like that you put that in there.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wouldn't say I'm a natural runner by any means. I have some family that runs marathons. I will never be that person, but I feel like I can get a little bit closer. And as you said, putting it out in the world to hold myself accountable. So
Wonderful. So let's start talking about mentorship because you're a mentor to other people and you are a mentee. So how have mentors been helpful for you personally in your career?
that relationship I've had with some of my mentors and on the receiving end, but also as a mentees, I wouldn't be where I am. I wouldn't have my job without the mentors and the coaches that I've had throughout my career, both formal and informal. I find having a relationship that can coach you through situations that you can run questions by that may eventually even evolve into a sponsor relationship. That's how you move forward. Relationships drive us to success. And that's where I found I wouldn't be where I am without the mentors that I've had.
So has any of your mentors evolved into being a sponsor? Because that's a huge thing for women in the workplace. We tend to have a lot of mentors, but not a lot of sponsors. Has that happened to you?
It has. It's actually happened multiple times for me. Both my own people leader evolved into a sponsor and an advocate for me in the business, but also someone that I worked with peripherally. So you mentioned I'm an advocate and I work actively in the women's network at my business. My previous chief diversity officer, I met her through a mentorship relationship. And so not only did I get my role as a co-chair of the Women's Network through my relationship with her, through working with her and her being a sponsor, but honestly, I got my day job through in large part working with her and her being an advocate for me because it actually introduced me being in that women's network role, introduced me to my current people leader. And so just making those connections has been invaluable for me. And that's why I'm not just an advocate for mentorship and coaching and sponsorship, but also for working in ERGs and taking on those types of roles because it gets you connected with potential mentors, with potential sponsors to take on your next role.
Interesting. Was that one of the reasons why you got involved and became a co-chair of the Women's Network?
It's a combination of passions for me. I was looking for my next role. I was looking to grow my skills into not just moving into a people leader role at the time, but moving eventually into a leader of people leader and continue to grow and support my organization. But it felt like I wanted it to be something that I was passionate about. And if you look back at my history, I worked in human rights for a long time when I was in college and things like that. So it is DEI is an area that I'm absolutely passionate about. And so it was a convergence of two things that I'm incredibly passionate about in terms of development and helping people around me in the DEI space and moving the organization forward. I find both of those things, if you can find anything that you're passionate about outside of your work combined with something that helps you grow is really a sweet spot for development.
So we should pursue our passions. Now, going back to
Absolutely.
mentorship that you talked about, there was something that I saw in one of the articles that was really interesting because a lot of people face this, but they don't talk about it. You said that your mentorship relationships were initially awkward. And talking to you now, there's nothing awkward about you. So I'd love to know more about what was that awkwardness about? Where did that come from? How did you feel in those first interactions?
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly can be awkward, so don't judge. By one interaction, I certainly can be awkward if given the circumstance. I am a natural introvert with like extrovert tendencies. But mentorship is awkward because you're asking for something and you may not know that person well. You may not have fully baked exactly what you're looking for. And that's honestly the beauty of what mentorship is trying to help you sort out. And that lack of surety And that lack of just communication, lack of experience with each other can make interactions awkward. And so my article that talked about that awkwardness was really about the relationship that I had with my mentor, my previous CDO, because honestly, we had interacted before we really set up a mentorship relationship. We'd interacted very peripherally. And the connection was made by my previous people leader because it felt like it was something that was aligned to my development plan, getting a mentor that was a little bit more senior in the organization, that had some of the experiences that would help me. That was another woman in the organization that had navigated successfully through the organization. That's what I was looking for. And the person that I worked with, that's exactly what she had. Not having really spoken to her, not really knowing her, those first couple interactions, just the struggle of getting comfortable talking to each other, comfortable in particular because you're being vulnerable. Both sides are being vulnerable in a mentorship relationship because you are admitting things that you don't know, things that you're unsure about. And when you don't know the person, you don't trust that person yet. Building that trust takes time. And so, really, any mentorship relationship that I've had starts out awkward. But the way that you overcome that is one, recognizing it, knowing that it is going to be awkward and having that in the back of your mind. But then the way to tackle it is put a plan in place. I'm a big planner, I'm a big list person. And so going into the action, into the interactions with understanding what you're trying to achieve, having items on your action list or things that you want to talk about, and additionally asking for feedback from that person because that's really what that relationship is about, is asking if it's working for them, making sure it's working for you. And so feedback goes both ways, right? That's how I would recommend overcoming that awkwardness is go into it with a plan, ask for feedback, give feedback, and then just understand that it's going to be awkward to begin with.
How long did it take for the awkwardness to subside, disappear from that specific relationship?
Maybe a couple interactions in, probably two, three interactions in, where I, in my interactions with her, I had asked for advice and asked to role play a couple scenarios. And the result, when I actually applied some of those things, worked. And so having the ability to attest or experience the success of it, and that's where I felt like I got value and I became a little bit more comfortable with that relationship. And the same in return, because that's the beauty of being a mentor or mentee. Honestly, there is so much value on both sides of that interaction. I have learned just as much, if not more, from being a mentor as being a mentee.
What have you learned as a mentor?
As a mentor, certainly not just one lesson, but the biggest lesson I've learned is probably adapting your style to what that other person is getting or looking to get out of the relationship. And so it is incredibly important as a mentor to understand what your mentee is looking for and how to help them. Because just like a conversation between, say, a husband and a wife, if I'm complaining, but I don't want a solution, I just want someone to listen to me. If my husband doesn't understand that, we're not going to have a very successful communication relationship or a very successful week. It's the same thing with a mentor and a mentee. I need to understand what my mentee is looking for in order to make sure I'm fulfilling their needs. And that in turn is rewards me incredibly because I get to see this variety of things that people are looking for. I get to provide advice as well as get advice back in return in terms of how that's working. And so it helps me develop as a mentor, as a coach, as a leader in my organization to make sure I'm helping future mentees and anyone else that wants to become a mentor as well.
All right, I was giggling inside when you gave your example with the husband because I talk to a lot of leaders and they say, "Oh, I'm trying to help this person out, but all they want to do is complain and they don't seem to be interested in solutions." So if as a mentor you're with someone and they're that kind of person in that moment, not that they're that kind of person, they haven't figured out the other way of being. So they seem to be really interested in complaining and not that interested in solutions. What do you do as a mentor to be able to leverage that conversation and add more value? Because it's hard to add value in a situation like that.
In some cases, everyone just needs someone to complain to sometimes. So recognizing and just being okay with it in some circumstances, because everyone needs an ally to talk to. And so it's just establishing some boundaries around what is okay to talk about, what is okay to share and complain about, as we said, versus, and when it goes either too far in terms of the topic or too far in terms of the length and time you're spending on that interaction. Because I think again, it's okay to spend some time on it, but also sharing the fact with your mentor or with your mentee that we only have so much time and I'm here to listen if that's what you need. Having said that, is this the way that you want to use the time with me? And making the decision or leaving the decision up to them. Because ultimately, that relationship, you are trying to help them get whatever they can out of it. And if that's what they feel like is the most value to them at that specific time, being okay with it. But again, setting limitations, just like any other space in your life, setting some boundaries in terms of what's okay to talk to you with as a mentor and what really should be stayed away from, or what you really can't add value to. And that's a good way to set boundaries is, hey, that's probably not something I can comment on or I can help with. May be more appropriate for another conversation. Let's refocus the conversation in another way to make sure you get value in a way that I can add. So the boundary setting is important, being clear about the communication is important, and also just being okay to be a listener sometimes, but just making sure that that person understands that probably not going to be the best use of time if that's all we're focusing on.
It's a nice way to highlight what's going on and then let them make the decision as to how they want to move forward. But this also indicates that you're a very nice mentor, very thoughtful, very kind. So I like what you said in terms of the planning and thinking about questions for your mentor and asking for feedback and getting those quick wins and sharing those quick wins as well with your mentor. That can really remove a lot of the awkwardness. Those are great tips. I want to move on to lean because I know you really love lean.
Yes.
Let's start with what is lean? You're the queen of lean. So, what is lean to you and what is lean to the audience here so we can all know, at least get a baseline of what is this?
Yeah, absolutely. So Queen of Lean is it's step a little too far, maybe, because I still feel like I am absolutely a pupil of Lean, which is honestly one of the best things about Lean is you're always learning. So for those who don't know what Lean is, it's really a business system. It's a process system for how you run your operations on a day to day. Larry Culp, who is the CEO of GE, for those who don't know, his interpretation of lean or definition of lean is common sense rigorously applied. And it is my favorite definition of lean because that's exactly what lean is. It's a set of tools, it's a set of process tools in particular that help you evaluate the way that you're doing business to make sure that you're really staying on target, that you're hitting your KPIs, that you're planning for the future, and that you're focusing on the data and not the people. And the next step of that is making sure that you're enabling the people that do the work because they're always the best people to solve your problems because they experience them every day. And that's what I love about lean is it's just a way to do business that really should be common sense, but it provides you some tools on how to apply common sense and make a difference with it in the way that you work day to day.
Apply common sense to make a difference. Common sense rigorously applied. Got me thinking. So you apply this concept of lean not only in more formal business work, but also on supporting diversity, equity, inclusion, and allyship, which is something that you're very passionate about. So how do those two blend together?
Lean, because it is a process or a set of tools, it's not specific to a scenario. Honestly, I use Lean at home. There's a tool called 5S that helps me sort my pantry. So you can use the tools of Lean in whatever way you want. But I find it's really helpful in the way that we've set up the Women's Network at GE Digital because it helps us take a step back from feelings and focus on data and focus on process. And I'm not saying in any way that talking about or validating feelings in DEIA is a bad thing. It's not. It's just incomplete because from what I've experienced in DEIA, a lot of businesses don't necessarily put the focus or support on DEIA or commitment that we would all like. They may be committed to it at a peripheral level, or they may have targets and diversity and equity inclusion reports that they put out. But in terms of impact on the people that are in the DEIA space, the maybe minority populations, maybe it's women, maybe it's our pride population, the people that are actually affected don't necessarily feel it all the time or feel the work that's being done, because a lot of companies stop at saying they're committed versus actually implementing the commitment. And I find lean, because it's a business process tool or a set of tools, it really helps you get to a place where you can measure your impact. You can see your impact because you talk about it. It is an open and transparent discussion. And it's something that is really an underlying foundation of the organization, or a language that everyone is already speaking. And so I don't need to make a business case to my organization as to why I want to do what's called a Kaizen or a focused workout on solving a metric problem in my DEIA space. So, say my attrition numbers are incredibly high as a business. I don't need to make a business case that I need to get everyone in a room and sit down and focus on the problem, because they already see it. They see it because we publicly talk about those numbers. We all see them as a KPI in the business. We all keep ourselves accountable to them. And the way that we solve those problems as a business, whether it's a DEIA metric or a revenue metric, is the same way. And so everyone is familiar with the mechanism of solving, and the language is already there. And you feel like you can actually make a difference because you see it in the numbers when it comes out.
This is a new way of thinking about promoting diversity, equity, inclusion. As someone who is co-chairing the Women's Network, how have you used this to gain more support? So how did you start and really get the senior leadership, the executives on board using lean with the Women's Network, not just acknowledging it and letting you guys run it, but also supporting it in whatever way that you wanted it to be supported?
I'm lucky in that my organization, since Larry Culp has come into GE, has been going through a lean transformation. Larry Culp, when he was at Danaher, lean was the way that they operated. And it is the way that GE used to operate, but moved away from it for a while. And when he came into the organization, it was almost a reinvigoration. And so I do have a little bit of a step up in terms of making the case for using lean in DEIA, because my leader of leaders already does this on a day-to-day basis. Having said that, not everyone is going to have that experience, nor do you need it, quite honestly, because there's so many tools in that lean toolkit that even if you don't use the language of lean, Kaizen, Hoshin, all of the terms that are very intimidating, there's still a mechanism or a process tool that you can apply that would help you get to where you're going. And so the way that we started in Women's Network at Digital, our business had let Women's Network and let some of our ERGs, I don't want to say lapse, but it just hadn't been given the focus that it should maybe 3 years ago. And it was really something that took place at a site basis or an individual leader basis, but it wasn't something that the organization really focused on. And then there was some events in the US and some events globally that really pushed the business to rethink what they were doing and hold themselves accountable. And so we took a look at Women's Network, took a relook at our Hispanic forum, at our African Affinity forum, all of those ERGs that were in place at GE before. And we said, let's restart this, but specifically for our business, and try to meet our needs. We have some problems with things like attrition. We have some problems with women in our business. We're a tech company. Everyone in tech has problems bringing women in and keeping women in the pipeline, getting to the next generation. And we had some problems that we wanted to solve. And because the business was already taking some steps in lean, already using things like problem solving, which is a lean tool, already using some of those to tackle some of our KPIs, it was, I don't want to say an easy case, but it was a logical case to say, let's reset up our ERGs. Let's run it just like we would a typical business unit or a typical P&L. Let's have monthly operating rhythms to look at our metrics. Let's make sure we are holding ourselves accountable when it comes to those metrics that we can impact. when our metrics around attrition, around pipeline and talent acquisition are not where they should be, let's host a problem solving event or let's have a Kaizen to actually try to tackle that problem and make some incremental steps. And so I think it was a natural thing for us to do, but just putting the things like standard work in place, that's probably one of the most basic elements of lean that I would recommend anyone take a look at. And that's essentially what is your most effective way of accomplishing anything. And so writing down what our standard work is, that's to me, that's the most basic place that anyone can start in lean is what are your processes? Do you know what they are? Do you have a process in place? If you don't, document it or come up with a process at least as a place to start. And so that's what we did in the Women's Network when we were looking at ourselves and putting our monthly operating rhythms in place and putting our metrics in place. And we said, do we have processes in place to accomplish all of the things that we want to? Do we have processes in place that make it easier to accomplish the things that we want to? And the answer in a lot of cases was no. And so that was our first step is let's document our event planning process. Let's document our budget process. Let's document what the roles and responsibilities of each of our chairs is and how often we have to meet, how we make decisions, all of those basic things that feel like common sense, right? But not everyone does. And particularly not everyone in the ERG space does. And so that's really what we took a step doing first was let's build out our standard work, understand what we want to accomplish on a day-to-day basis, and then let's measure ourselves on it.
Very nice examples. It seems like lean really helps organize things and put everyone on the same page in order to achieve that objective.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Within the Women's Network, has lean helped reveal, maybe in one instance or example that you could share, something that was there, that was a problem, and then because you applied lean, you're able to see the problem more clearly, find the solution, and get your KPI looking beautiful again?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest examples over the last couple of years I did mention is problems with bringing women into the pipeline and for our talent acquisition team. And when we saw our metrics going red in terms of how many people in our organization, our balance of male female population was so off, really, when we started digging into the data around it, it took us back upstream to the talent acquisition process. So you can't have a good balance of women and men in the organization. I also want to recognize anyone who is non-binary, but you can't have a balance of that population without having a pipeline of women or diversity, a diverse pipeline coming into the organization. And so that's what we were seeing is our numbers in terms of that balance were dropping. And we needed to find out what was the problem. And the problem ultimately was that our talent acquisition pipeline was not getting what we needed it to in terms of that diverse balance. And so once we did that problem solving, we understood our data in terms of where some of our root causes were. Then you move upstream, as it's called in lean, to solve the root cause of the problem. And if that root cause of the problem is the talent acquisition team, how do we support them to start bringing in more talent? And that's things like connecting them with the Women's Network, making allies of our chairs so that they post jobs regularly to their own networks, getting them connected with women's organizations like SWE, like Anita B, posting in places where we know that there will be a greater population of diverse people to make sure that's what's coming into our pipeline. So it's not just a problem of fixing the symptom, but fixing the root cause upstream. And so what we found is that just giving those tools to some of our talent acquisition team has greatly improved the pipeline of diverse talent coming into the organization.
That's fantastic. It seems like having clarity around where the issues are, using lean, using data, analytical approach to problem solving, you're then able to be a lot more creative about the solution as well, because it's just a lot more straightforward. You know exactly where the problem is, then the solution becomes more evident, and you're able to move the needle significantly in that KPI.
Absolutely. The problem is by no means solved. I doubt any tech company or any company has solved the diversity problem or a diverse pipeline problem. But what I will say is we're getting incrementally better. And that's the other thing about lean is that it's always about getting better. It's always about continuous improvement. Can you take a little bit more waste out? Can you make the process a little bit easier? Can you add a little bit more value to your end customer? That's what lean is. And so as someone who personally, I'm a learner, if you look at my Clifton strengths, I am a learner and I want to learn something every day. And that I find is the most exciting part about lean is you're always striving to learn something.
Beautiful. So, has lean helped you to speak your mind unapologetically in any instance?
Absolutely. The one of the tenets of lean is that it's about the data and not about people. And what I mean by that is when you get into a problem, let's say a business is not meeting their revenue targets, and it becomes a lot of times it becomes an issue of pointing fingers. This person didn't meet their sales targets, or that person didn't complete their work on time, or we didn't get this proposal out to the customer, and that's why we're not meeting our targets. And it's all about pointing fingers at people. And I find one of the most effective parts of lean is about putting a pause on conversations like that, stepping back, having everyone in the organization step back and say, hold on, you may feel like that's the case. You may, in a qualitative view, have that perspective, but does the quantitative data validate that perspective? And that's exactly what problem solving about launching a Kaizen or whatever you want to call it, that's exactly what that's about. Because what you do as you prepare for a problem solving report or a Kaizen week or whatever it is, you dig into the data. That's your pre-work is what is the data telling you? What is your average days to get out a proposal? What is the average turnaround time of getting something through the system to complete it? What is the average time it takes for you guys to launch a project? Whatever it is, it's about finding the data first and letting that lead you through the process. Because once you have the data, then you can map it into what's called a value stream map. And so you can actually see how much time is being spent at every step. You can see what the steps are. You can see who is involved or the resources that you're spending at each step. What is the wait time or the waste time between each of those steps? And that's really what it's about is finding that data, plotting it out on a value stream map, and then having the other really important part is having everyone see it. Because just having my function or just having the sales function see something is not going to fix the problem if it's a multi-business unit or a multi-team problem. What it's about when you're doing a lean initiative is bringing everyone who has a say, who is impacted by a process into the conversation, viewing the data themselves, seeing where the truth lies in terms of the data, and then taking that a step further and working together to solve the problem. So the most successful Kaizens, problem solving initiatives, whatever it is that I've ever seen, are cross-functional. They've spent the pre-work time to build out the data associated with where you are today, your current state, and then they sit together and they work together very openly to figure out what can be removed from the process because it's not being value added to the end customer or to internal teams.
So, what I understand from what you're sharing is that when you apply lean and you problem solve with lean in an organization or in any situation really where you're trying to improve things and it involves other people, that bringing everyone on the same page with something that's more tangible is a really good step to facilitate conversation and speaking your minds, because that way people are way more likely to listen. Like you said, it's eliminating all of that. Oh, it's you, the blame game, which again puts people at a very defensive mode. And part of being able to speak up effectively is to get the other person to want to listen to you, and getting everyone on the same page and agreeing and reading the documents and being okay with the numbers and setting the stage of what the problem is with the lean process puts everyone on the same page. And then the conversation just flows a lot more naturally because it's no longer about, oh, this is my opinion, this is what I think. Like you said, it's not just about the qualitative part of the conversation and individuals' biases and thoughts and background and assumptions. I like that.
Absolutely.
Lean.
Yeah, absolutely. So to give you an example, 2 weeks ago, my team went through what was called a Kaizen. So I mentioned a Kaizen it's really a focused working session that happens usually over a period of 3 to 5 days. Ideally, you're all sitting in a room together and you're working through a problem. In this case, given restraints and given global team members, we had to do it virtually, which can be painful at times, but still also incredibly successful. And so my team, when we were going through this Kaizen, it was to solve a problem around getting a particular type of proposal out to our customers. It felt like it was taking too much time. And I say feel intentionally because we were getting messages from different groups in the organization saying, oh, it's taking too long in the services side of things. Oh, it's taking too long to develop the pricing model from product. Oh, it's taking too long for the sellers to get the information to us. It's taking too long for the solution, for our architects to actually build the solution for us. That's all qualitative data, and by no means is it bad. It helps us pinpoint where some of the problems feel like or we have some areas for waste and improvement. That's great, but it's not complete. And so what we did in preparation was we looked at our data. We had quoted probably 20 of these throughout the year so far. We took a look at those 20 examples. How long was it taking to get through each phase? Who were all of the people that were touching it at these different phases? And then once we had a view of all of the resources, all of the time, all of the steps that it was taking, we could actually step back as a team and then in that Kaizen, work out, hey, does this feel like it's necessary? And question each other, put pressure on each other to say, does that really feel like it's adding value to the end customer? Does it really feel like it's a necessary step to get to result Y? And if the answer is no, or even a question mark, then you dig in a little bit further. And that's exactly what we did. And so the results of just a Kaizen that we had 2 weeks ago is we have the ability to eliminate a significant amount of time out of our process, something to the tune of 10 days from a 28-day process. And that's an incredible result for my team, who already has limited resources, just like everyone else out there, but also for our customers because they get to see what they need to much quicker.
Great example. And it showcases how that Kaizen process, the lean process, can actually contribute to more challenging of each other, more challenging the status quo, even more disagreement in a productive way, while at the same time creating more collaboration to achieve the same objective.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
very powerful. All right. So one question here to close off is about candor, because you love candor. And candor is a very important attribute in business and in leadership. Have you ever in the past hesitated to have candor? Why is that?
If I ever hesitated, yes, yes, but with some qualifiers on there. When I was a little bit younger, a little bit less experienced as a people leader, giving feedback is a hard thing to get familiar with. It is probably the most valuable thing you can do. And when done right, the most rewarding thing you can do as a people leader. But it's not easy because you don't know how someone's going to react. And you want to provide that feedback in a way that they can act on and isn't about personal attributes, but it's about how they can be better at not just doing their job, but wherever they want to get to themselves. And so I hesitated, not that I wouldn't say I stopped or didn't give feedback in any circumstance, but I hesitated depending on the scenario to give that feedback at the time. Now that I'm a little bit deeper into my people leader journey and I'm a leader of people leaders, my favorite thing to do is give people feedback. And at times, again, it can be difficult, but the most rewarding experience as a people leader is when you give someone a piece of feedback and then they act on it and you see the growth and you got to be a little part of that growth. All the credit goes to them for all of the work that they did, but got to be a little piece of that growth. And just having someone act on that almost immediately is the most gratifying experience. But the way that you have to do that, and I don't know how everyone is familiar, if you're familiar with Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor,
Yeah.
probably one of my favorite business books out there because it talks about caring genuinely while also delivering tough feedback. And there has to be a balance of those two things. Because if when you're giving someone feedback, they don't feel like you care about them, and the reason that you're giving it is that you care, it's not probably not going to go over as well as you think it will. And so anytime I give feedback, it is something that obviously I want to do as close to the time where that feedback is needed, but also being conscious that I still need to think about how I'm going to deliver that feedback. Think about, is it the appropriate time to give that feedback? Because that can really impact someone, right? If you're coming out of a meeting and it was a very contentious meeting where people say tempers flared, someone was offended because something else wasn't delivered on time and deadlines weren't met and targets weren't met because of it, that's a personal thing. But when you coach someone through the way that they interacted, say they were much more reactionary than they were responsive, when you're giving someone that feedback, probably not the appropriate time, 2 minutes after a meeting, to say, hey, you're still pretty hot. You should probably take a step back. Maybe take a little bit of time to deliver that feedback a little bit later and ask them to reflect on it. Because I think that's the other piece of feedback as well, is the most important tool for people to grow is to be able to reflect themselves. And so I find anytime I'm giving feedback, that's the question I need to ask first is, hey, in this scenario, what do you think happened? What do you think about, or how do you feel about how that interaction went? And a lot of times they'll be able to take a step back and reflect on that themselves, how they could have gotten better. And then I find it's when they're reflecting on that already, it's a much easier case to make that give additional feedback and say, hey, in addition to that, maybe think about doing it this way. Or if you take this approach, next time it will have that impact. So I find that's where candor, I find it is incredibly valuable for me. I always want people to be candid with me, but I also want to continue to stay committed to it myself because I find that's where you get the most growth.
And committing to that feeling that you said, the greatest experience ever as a people leader, which is to see growth and change from that individual that you gave them that candid feedback and they took action and got a result. That would be a great KPI for a leader, is how much of your, or what percentage of the feedback that you give gets actioned on and gets positive results from your people, because that way, you're adding value, you're really adding value to them, which ultimately is the feel good factor that you're talking about. It's a way to measure it. I had never thought about that specific way to think about it. So what's your advice for people to be able to commit to candor in the same way that you commit to candor?
The biggest thing that you can do to commit to candor and have people around you understand you commit to candor is be open to feedback yourself. And demonstrate that you're open to feedback. And the way to do that sometimes is not self-criticize, but be open about where you feel like you have some areas to improve. Because if you're showing that you understand there's room for development and maybe you didn't interact in the way that you would have liked, and you share that openly with your team, that and the people around you, that makes them a little bit more comfortable in coming to you to begin with. And so I think the biggest thing that you can do is just show that you're open to feedback, show that you're open and humble to accepting it. And then once you've built that trust to receive it yourself, then it's so much easier to give it in return, and not just give it, but also have it received well and have it acted on.
Fantastic feedback. Be very open to feedback ourselves. Any last comment or advice around lean, around candor or mentorship?
The theme for me in all of those places is being open to learning. As I said, I'm a learner. It's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And I know there is so much more for me to learn in all of those spaces. And I would encourage everyone, whether your passion is lean, whether it's DEIA, whether it's the environment or decarbonization, whatever your passion is, be open to knowing and know that you do not know everything, and there's so much more to learn. And so that's my general attitude, and my advice for anyone is there's always more to learn, no matter how much of an expert you are.
And it's a very empowering attitude to have, no matter what we're dealing with, for sure. So thank you so much, Kelly, for sharing your experiences, your passion, all of these passion areas that you have around lean, diversity, equity, inclusion, supporting women with women's network, being candid, but also being open at the same time and having this learning attitude. Thank you. I appreciate you coming to the podcast and sharing all these insights.
Oh, thank you, Ivna. It was a pleasure to meet you and excited to be here.